In the 1960s, computers were about as big as shipping containers. The first primitive satellite was shot into orbit, and you didn't even have the first video game Pong. Instead, you got the first pocket calculator. And yet, still at the time, the Americans and the Soviets worked on brain implants to control animals and humans. The infamous Dr. Joylin West teamed up with the scientist Jose Delgado from Spain. This was all under the umbrella of Operation MKULTRA. Delgado had some success with animals, and then he moved on to humans. He found 25 patients who suffered from schizophrenia and epilepsy, and these people, they were willing to sign the contracts in the hopes of getting help. And they became these guinea pigs. So people put electrodes into their brain, so you could force them to make certain movements, for example. And oftentimes, these people thought they were making these movements voluntarily. So this was also a very interesting facet of this. And you could also induce euphoria by pressing buttons. One of the ideas was to create a cerebral pacemaker to make people calm and docile. Now, at the time, you had quite the amount of psycho killers in Californian prisons, so these became the guinea pigs. There's been some research. You can find that in various books about MKUltra and Bluebird and Artichoke and all these programs. And so they told patients, or they told people in these prisons, they were getting free medical care. Meanwhile, these people were used for implants, brain implants, and that turned these psychos into docile human beings. Now, before, they had the shortest fuse you can imagine. If you looked at them the wrong way, they would take your head off. And afterwards, they would just sleep the whole time and not really care about much of anything. Now, the scientists were kept on a strict need-to-know basis, meaning they thought they were benefiting mankind. They were just helping to make these psychos calm. But, of course, this sort of manipulation worked the other way, too, so you could make people very, very violent. There's been experimentation on prisoners during the Vietnam War. This, of course, is still very, very secret. Allegedly, people with implants were then made to kill each other to see if that would actually work. The CIA always wanted to create the perfect assassin, the perfect agent. So the perfect agent does the operation, feels euphoric, and later you can just delete the memory. This sounds a bit like the movie The Bourne Identity, but Jason Bourne didn't have an implant, and of course he deviates from the program. If the ideal agent or assassin gets captured, he cannot really provide any information, and then of course an assassin doesn't even have to be human. DARPA, the technology department of the Pentagon, they developed a neural implant to be used on sharks. So you could just use sharks to swim around and detect enemy operations and that sort of thing. You could also strap these sharks with explosives and detonate them, for example, to destroy a pipeline or underwater cables, that sort of thing. There was also experimentation done on rats and dogs. So this is confirmed, actually, the CIA used dogs. Now, imagine if you can implant explosives into these animals and you guide them to the target person and you just press the button. Mission accomplished. And of course, these animals, they can't ever provide any information under questioning, under interrogation. Internally, in the CIA and in DARPA, the argument was always, if the Soviets do it, we have to do it. Even in 1962, the Soviets, they implanted people with electrodes. They used over 200 humans for that, and they didn't even bother to find people that had problems such as schizophrenia or epilepsy, so they just find people and make them join the program. Then you had a symposium in 1968, And a couple of more. And in the year 1972, Dr. M.L. Sheikh, he was from a institute in Moscow, and he was voicing the concern that the Soviets could use this for nefarious purposes. Now, the human brain is fairly complicated. Nobody is ever the same, so every brain is different, and the brain constantly changes. So reading information is quite the challenge, and for a long time, the accuracy of reading neurons and signals, the accuracy was between 40% and 80%. Now, where we stand today is, of course, very, very secret. Elon Musk's company Neuralink, they just received FDA approval to start clinical studies on humans. Of course, the framing is always helping people with disabilities, people who fought in the wars and they lost limbs or they're paralyzed and so on and so forth. Neuralink, as the name implies, wants to create a neural interface, so you can just combine the brain with computers. They're not the only ones doing this. You have BlackRock Neurotech, you have companies like Synchron, they've already experimented on people. Then you get the US National Institutes of Health. They actually approached Neuralink to cooperate, but Neuralink was not interested because of all the government oversight and the bureaucratic red tape. So Elon Musk is known for getting results quicker and cheaper than the actual government. And DARPA has been working on the neural engineering system design, creating an interface, and you had the NeuralFast program and various other programs to increase learning. So for example, if it takes a certain amount of time to get a soldier up to a certain standard, you can shorten the time span it takes you to get him there, and you can actually make him perform better than a classically trained human. Then you have sort of these ideas to get people access to, for example, hyperspectral imaging. Now imagine if you could just look around on the battlefield, or you're flying a helicopter or whatever. Imagine if you observe your surroundings and you have access to thermal optics and even hyperspectral imaging, so you can see all these things that you would normally not see. So you don't have to implant a thermal optics system into the human. You don't have to put it into somebody's head, or you don't have to strap a camera like this to somebody's face, but you just have a neural interface and you can just hook somebody up to a camera system. Then there's the issue of analyzing imagery. So more and more satellites are being shot into space, even by Elon Musk's company SpaceX. Lots of spy satellites. So you get more and more images, and there aren't enough people to analyze these images. Now, for a long time, the military has used computer systems to automatically detect enemy troop movements and enemy tank locations and so on and so forth. And the systems get better and better. However, humans can do a much better job. So the objective at DARPA was to figure out how the human brain works in that regard. So you can just copy that skill and teach the computer that skill. When Elon Musk was a guest on the Joe Rogan podcast, they talked about Neuralink and the capabilities of that program. And Joe Rogan was constantly asking about the dangers and the legacy of MKULTRA and all these mind control programs. But Elon was having none of that. He was just talking about the medical purposes and all the great stuff you can achieve with that. Now, that might be Elon's genuine focus. However, he has been hooked up to the military-industrial complex, and they play their own game. So Elon is also leading the world's #1 manufacturer of electric cars. Elon is a staunch believer in climate change. However, the climate and weather science was built by the military for the military. This has been going on for a long time. The military wants to have the best weather forecast and climate forecast That's what all this is for. Every weather satellite, civilian satellite, is actually used for military purposes. You cannot just watch, icebergs and oceans. You can also watch enemy movements. And so the true capabilities of these weather systems are secret. Nobody else is supposed to understand and predict the weather. Nobody's supposed to be able to understand this as well as the American military. Now, of course, the question arises, why jump through all these hoops? Why all this effort to combine humans and machines if you can just do with the machines only? Now, warfare is going more and more in the direction of automated drones and that sort of thing, and vehicles that can drive, autonomous robots that can decide according to specific parameters what to kill, when to kill. And so why go through all this trouble to work on humans? It's like in the movie RoboCop and the RoboCop remake. Why have this human element in there if you don't really need it? So this is something to ponder about. This is probably a tool that is most likely to be used for intelligence purposes. So you can actually have control over humans outside of the battlefield. Now, at some point, the technology will be cheap enough and reliable enough to be deployed en masse in soldiers. But then, of course, in 10 to 20 years, you will most likely see fully automated robots that decide autonomously.